So, Fiona, the newest altered support simulacrum is here, and you're probably wondering to yourself, is she worth it? The short answer to that is yes. Whether you're free to play or a whale, Fiona is absolutely worth the investment. So, without wasting your time, let me point out what makes Fiona so great, and probably tell you what you came to this video searching for. Here are 10 of her most outstanding qualities, tips, and trivia that you might want to know. 1. She requires no investments in order to function as your team support. 0 or 3 stars are all she needs for full support functionality. 5 through 6 stars are what you aim for when creating a full DPS comp with her, with getting roughly a 16% final damage buff compared to stars 1 versus stars 6. Support mains should definitely invest in her 4-piece Matrix set in order to buff their teammates. And, as an FYI, the benediction and attack buffs obtained from the support buffer to the DPS receiver, from both of them using the Matrix set, will stack. So if both the support player and the attack player are running this Matrix set, their effects will stack on top for the attacker. Fiona's a good healer, but she's not the best. Practically speaking, she functions as a supplementary healer in field support, like Zero, but stronger. She's comparable and functions similar to Nemesis with her dodge heals and her discharge, but with half the healing output and more support. Fiona has an absurd energy recharge, both from her third skill mechanics and her plunge attack spamming, which also happens to have an amazing efficiency output. And there's also the fact that her benediction dodges will also recharge your energy, similar to Pepper and Coco. Her 5th skill trait, the final damage physical buff, will last indefinitely after being activated. Practically speaking though, the overall DPS is the same when compared to using her other skills. Her secondary skill slot is completely independent of all weapon keys, much like a relic slot. This makes it extremely spammable for extra DPS and support functionality. She's an extremely reliable jack of all trades and a master of few. There's a strong chance that she'll raise your DPS output by 20% for over half the team comps that you can possibly come up with, and probably even more if she's paired together with Lyn for the Altered Resonance comps. Her most synergetic DPS comps appear to revolve around Lyn, Lan, Icarus, Fenrir, Claudia, and Lyra. Her overall most synergetic support comps for both buffing and healing her teammates appears to be Lyra and Coco Ritter. The matrices that you want to be using as a support are probably going to be Fiona, Zero, and Huma. Fiona, along with Lyn and Lan, the 3 great enablers of this game, offer free-to-players access to the best source of DPS and physical comps, mainly through Claudia and Shido. Fiona's awakening traits are absurd, even while they're nerfed. Her trait gives you a flat-out plus 18% final damage, on top of all of her other skill buffs. Unless it gets nerfed again by the time this video comes out or after. As a support main, and a free-to-play one at that, she is stupidly amazing for your own DPS and the overall support for your team. My only fault with her is that her healing output is basically the equivalent of putting band-aids on an open wound. More accurately, her healing rates are about half as effective as Nemesis, so Fiona herself probably can't keep your team alive if the damage becomes too much. However, when you have the ability to bam your ulti skills like a Saki on steroids, that's really hardly an issue you need to be concerned with. But as a support main, I've been constantly asking myself a certain question. Is Fiona the answer for supports to deal real DPS? And the answer to that question is yes! No. Kind of? Half. Yes. Thanks to her ability to insta-kill mobs at 7 and 12% HP, that alone is a godsend for damage. And for most supports, that's probably about 10 times the amount of damage that we normally dish out when we participate in team contents like raids. And as far as raw damage goes, if we measure using the standard simulacrum as an E-rank tier, and Lan fire comps as S-rank tier, then Fiona benediction teams, that being specifically Lyra and Nemesis, would rank in at about C rank. And in Lyra's case, her damage can be boosted up to A rank tier if she's used together with Lyn. That's pretty much on par with the other crazy meta comps like Fenrir and Icarus. However, the key word here is boosted. Functionally, an altered Lyra comp can only achieve this kind of damage against single target bosses. And oh boy, that alone is hard enough as is. In the field, an altered Lyra team only does about B-rank damage at best. So, to answer my question, again, can we as support mains use Fiona to dish out DPS like attack mains? Kind of. As long as we properly build up our equips and our matrices, a support main with Fiona can actually start giving those attackers a run for the money, if we put our resources into it. When it comes to Fiona, she has a lot of options available to her. It might get tricky trying to figure out how to sort everything out. So, let's take a quick rundown through Fiona's kit, and point out which tools you will probably use the most. A lot of people were wondering whether two of Fiona's Matrix sets would stack up on top of each other. And the answer to that is yes. To summarize what people were talking about, Fiona's Matrix has two different effects, one for Benediction and another for any other resonance. If a Benediction player activates their Fiona Matrix in order to buff a non-healer who's also running the Fiona Matrix, those Matrix effects will stack up on top of each other for the receiver, because it counts as receiving two different effects, even if it's the same Matrix set. Fiona's Scatter technique lets you customize the skill with 6 different effect options, allowing to use 2 of them at the same time. The fact that you can use 2 is important. Her weapon is extremely unique in the fact that she can literally use 2 different skills at the same time, with the second skill having an entirely new and separated, dedicated hotkey for this. That means this hotkey remains forever on the screen, even if you switch weapons. It's pretty much like having an extra relic slot to use. Because this hotkey is independent, it makes it extremely easy to spam, so typically, you want to put a skill with low cooldown into this secondary skill slot. The skills that works best in this secondary skill slot are, honestly, every single skill except for number 3, Torrential Force. But the ones that you probably want to put here the most are Skills 1, Hydro Focus, Skill 2, Vortex, and Skill 5, Aqua Shackle. Fiona's Awakening trait is one of the best traits the game currently has to offer, and it heavily impacts the gameplay. It has a flat out 18% final damage boost, making it usable across all weapons that you choose. But it also gives large buffs to all of her skills, so if you use Fiona, using her trait is pretty much a must in almost all situations, except for maybe dedicated team support. Fiona's basic skill, Crashing Falls, deals about 400% AoE damage. It strongly suspends enemies around you in a very wide circle. It has a base cooldown of about 30 seconds, but it adapts and takes on the cooldown of the first skill add-on that you choose, and it immediately activates those effects after Fiona hits the ground. Skill 1, Hydro Focus, deals wide AoE damage and buffs your elemental damage by 6% for 20 seconds. When using Fiona's trait, the buff to elemental damage is raised from 6% to 12%. Skill 2, Vortex, is basically raw, spammable AoE damage. When using Fiona's trait, Vortex receives a 30% damage buff when you use the skill while Moonstar Bracelets are your active weapon. Skill 3, Torrential Force, grants a 12% buff to skill and discharge damage, and it generates 60 energy every second. This buff lasts for 35 seconds. The skill has a 30-second cooldown, but this cooldown is reset every single time you activate Fiona's Discharge. This makes it ideal to use in your primary skill slot together with Crashing Falls. Doing this will allow you to spam her Crashing Falls skills for extra damage every time you unleash her ulti attack. When using Fiona's trait, the buff to skill and discharge damage is raised an additional 12% for a final plus 24% damage in skills and discharge. Skill number 4, Maelstrom, is a final damage buff that slowly builds up over the course of 10 seconds and maxes out at 26% final damage. It has a 30-second cooldown, however, this buff will last indefinitely until you switch weapons. Because of this, you want to use this buff on a character like Umi, whose damage benefits from staying out on the field for long stretches of time. When using Fiona's trait, an additional 33% final damage is added when using a physical weapon, granting you an end total of 59% final damage. Skill 5, Aqua Shackle, freezes enemies in place for 3 seconds, and it reduces their resistances by 8%. This is typically the skill that you want to use while running group contents, such as raids and Origins of War. When using Fiona's trait, enemies are now held in place for 5 seconds, and an additional 10% resistance debuff is added, reducing the resistance down to a total of 18%. Skill 6, Wellspring, in simple layman's terms, after going through the math, grants you a plus 9% elemental damage for 20 seconds, if your HP stat is 110k or higher. If your HP reaches 160k, your elemental damage is boosted up to 15% total. When using Fiona's trait and Fortitude Resonance together, you will also gain a plus 9% buff on all of your resistance stats. Fiona's ultimate has 3 different effects. First, it deals 700% damage. Secondly, it heals you for 300% of your attack. And lastly, it buffs you according to the weapon resonance that you're using, and is able to stack multiple times. In short, Fiona is telling you to spam the living hell out of her Discharge skills at every opportunity that you can take. For the attack and balance resonance, she gives you a 15% attack buff for 30 seconds. Nice, simple, and useful. For Fortitude, she buffs your resistance by 4% with each use for 30 seconds. This stacks up to 5 times for a total of 20% resistance. If your HP drops below 30% during this time, you receive an emergency 40% damage reduction, which lasts for 5 seconds, helping to give you time to recover your missing HP. For Benediction Resonance, she provides the whole team a one-time damage shield for 10 seconds. Additionally, her 300% healing effect receives a 20% buff, stacking twice up to 40%. Lastly, by holding down the attack button, Fiona can scan and lock onto a teammate to give them extra buffs and 50% extra healing, meaning that Fiona can actually heal at least one of your teammates a substantial amount. At least one. The type of buffs received depends on the weapons that they're using. If they're attack or balance, they receive 20% of your attack stat as a buff. If they're Fortitude, 50% of your resistance is given to them as a buff. If they're Benediction, an additional 30% healing is applied to both of you. When you advance Fiona's Moonstar bracelets with multiple copies, the main buffs that you're receiving can basically be summarized like this. Maxing out Fiona's weapon increases your final damage buffs and provides you the ability to insta-kill your enemies, starting from 12% HP. When you advance the Moonstar bracelets to 1 star, you gain a buff that stacks up to 5 times every time you use a weapon or a discharge skill. But this does not include your spammable secondary skill. Well, at the very least, it doesn't yet. This buff stack has a 6-second decay time, meaning that as long as you use any skill once every 6 seconds, you can keep your buffs maxed out at a 100% uptime. There are 2 different buffs being applied here. A final damage buff, starting at 3% at 1 stack, and maxes out at 9% at 5 stacks. There is a second buff for healing, which starts off at 6% for 1 stack, and caps out at 18% at 5 stacks. At 3 stars, your weapons gain the ability to insta-kill any PvE enemy based on your weapon resonance and your buff stacks. For Benediction users, you can kill your targets starting from 4% HP and maxes out at 12% HP at 5 stacks. For all other resonances, executions start at 3% HP and maxes out at 7% HP at 5 stacks. At 5 stars, managing your buff stacks becomes pretty much impossible to mess up now, and you gain a one-time death immunity once every 25 seconds. Your buffs only decay once every 20 seconds now, and Fiona's scattering skills also stack to the buffs. This means that your secondary skill now contributes to the buff stacks, and her primary skills add 2 stacks to it instead. At 6 stars, the final damage buff that you got at 1 stars gets a big upgrade. We now gain 14% final damage at 1 stack of buffs, and we cap out at 28% final damage at 5 stacks. And now that we've gotten Fiona's skills down, you might be wondering how to actually use them in a fight. As a support main, here's how we would probably do it. First up, we need to set up our weapons and matrices. In order to maximize the amount of buffs, healing, and support to our teammates, we'd probably run Fiona, using skills number 3 and 5, Coco, and Lyra, along with the Fiona, Zero, and Human matrices. The Zero matrix should probably go onto Coco's staff in order to maximize the damage buffs that your teammates receive. And for the sneaky ones that did know about this, no. Zero matrix on Lyra's shields exploit does not work in our current game version. Sorry. For Fiona's matrix, it honestly doesn't matter which weapon it goes on, as long as you're using her Moonstar bracelet. So, the question now is, where do we put Huma's matrix? If we put it on Fiona, we're more likely to spend time using dodge attacks to help heal the team and to recharge our energy even faster. But in my case, I'll put the Human matrix on Lyra. Lyra's dodge attacks will give me more crowd control, but more importantly, I'll stay on Lyra long enough in order to keep the target's attack stats debuffed and to inflict the physical grievous onto them. So that way, not just me, but the rest of my team can get some extra damage in. To kick things off, we'll start our battles off with a dodge attack from Coco in order to build up some charge and to summon a healing drone for more energy recharge and a damage boost for the whole team. We can also activate her skill right off the bat to further increase everybody else's damage. Immediately after, we swap to Fiona and activate Crashing Falls, buffed together with their third add-on, Torrential Force. This way, we increase our damage, but more importantly, our energy recharge. Then, we swap and dodge attack with Lyra in order to activate the Human matrix. Then we continue to attack with Lyra until our ultimate's been fully charged and we've inflicted the Grievous debuff onto the target. And finally, we activate Coco's Discharge to simultaneously heal our teammates, but more importantly, buff them with her skill and her Zero matrix set. From here, we rinse and repeat the process, typically favoring Coco's ulti over Fiona's at a 2-to-1 ratio. This way, we can better buff and heal the rest of the team. And of course, during this entire rotation process, you'll be mashing that secondary skill button, which should be set to the 5th add-on, Aqua Shackle. Every single damn time it's off its cooldown in order to further cripple your targets and to support your team's damage output. And if you're using Fiona for a DPS comp instead of a support, the attacker's DPS rotation basically follows the same principles. Except now, you want to be spamming Fiona's ulti skill at almost every single chance that you can get. This way, you can abuse the cooldown reset on skill 3, Torrential Force, to maximize your damage. In simple layman's terms, Fiona DPS is basically skill spam, ulti spam, and skill spam, then repeat. And for the most part, that should conclude my research and analysis for Fiona, omitting a few bits and pieces of information, such as the Maelstrom skill, together with the Umi teams. So, what do I think about Fiona after all of this? As a support main, and a free-to-play one at that, who doesn't even have a damn 6-star Lin on his main account, Fiona is a must. It doesn't matter if she's 0 or 6 stars, both my team utility and my DPS are going to skyrocket, together with her help. You can basically think of Fiona as an alternative to Lin, except Fiona has more team utility and is even more free-to-play friendly. And, if you happen to have any combination of Fiona, Lin, and or Lon to work with, you are basically set for life. Oh my dear lord, why the hell is this video 20 minutes long? This was supposed to be 8 minutes max! Who the hell has time to watch a 20-minute video these days? Frickin' crikey.